Hey my friends, I'm going to do something a little unusual, and I'm going to do some work around Lenormand. What? So this is a sample reading I'm doing for a friend around their work situation, and I just thought it would be interesting to share with you how I'm working through this stuff, because I constantly complain about Lenormand being really hard to read. And so I'm going to do it on Tableau, and what you can see here is a sliver of my Tableau board, which I use instead of a cloth because it's sturdier, and I can actually move it around even if I need to. So, but I can't fit the whole thing in my screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shuffle, lay them out, and then I'm going to take a picture of it and move it over to the computer and work through it that way through VoiceOver. So I'm going to do some shuffling, and I'm going to lay out the cards, and then we'll move over and I'll talk through what I got for you. Or in this case, for my friend. Whoops. Ooh. I really love my neighborhood, but I live near the fire department, and so I hear sirens all day. So as I shuffle, I'll describe, my friend is in a sort of rough situation at work and wants to know what the situation looks like and whether there's any potential for it getting better in the next couple months. So we're going to take a picture, which is sort of what a friend's Tableau is, of what's going on, and explore whether there's anything he can do or whether there's any potential for it getting better. This is the Burning Serpent Oracle, by the way. But I did remove the extra cards. I love the cardstock on this deck. I always forget how large these cards are. I'm trying to make it so I can see the titles when I take a picture later on. That's the Mice and the Moon. Hopefully that'll be clear. Excuse me. It's allergy season. How pretty are these cards? All right, so take this off. Woo! there's the whole thing. I'm going to take a picture of it, and then I'll move over to the computer. So, I am going to go through this reading, and this is how I do larger spreads for folks when they order them. I actually really like large spreads, and this is one of the reasons why I've been forcing myself to work with Lenormand, because I like the idea of the grand tableau. And I know, you can do it with Kipper too, but Kipper's even newer to me. But I probably will make a similar board for Kipper, because I really like Kipper a lot. So what I'm going to start with doing is I'm going to look for the anchor card and look for what's around it. So interesting, there's nothing below it, which is cool, I guess, in a way, because it suggests to a degree the sort of rootlessness of the situation. So I'm going to come here. I'm also going to look at what's in the upper left corner in the Rider house, and sort of explore what that suggests as well. And that's where I'll start. So the Rider has the snake in the house. And that's an interesting journey, right? Because it suggests a few things. One, it suggests that where, whatever news is coming along isn't super trustworthy. It also suggests to me, in this case, because the Rider suggests movement and the snake suggests, a path in many ways, I do allow myself the flexibility to say that, where this person is, where he is right now, is that he is, in a way, kind of on this long, winding road when it comes to work, and that it does make sense. And it also, if I look at Rider in terms of just, or rather the snake, in terms of being untrustworthy or wrong, it may be the wrong path. So that's an interesting thing to start with. So now I'm going to come down to here and look at the anchor card again here in the House of the Lilies. And just if I, create that connection, the lilies often has a lot to do with maturity and age. And I can say that this person has been in this job a long time, which in a sense makes a connection. And I think their intentions are pure. I think that they want to create what they do into that connection. So that's a nice validation. And one of the things I'm doing initially is just looking for validation. Another thing that I do, and this is an interesting example because I don't have the full 9 cards, but I find the subject that the reading is about, and I read the 9 cards around it as though it were a 9-card spread. And normally what I do is I actually start by linking the middle card with the top card, with the top left. And so there's an interesting connection here, because while this person's unhappy at work, they're also, they're in a position where the job is kind of a gift in some ways. So they might benefit from looking at what, is beneficial about the job. And that might be an interesting place to start. So that's an interesting combination. But if I pause for a second and look at the anchor card not as a job card, but as an anchor, what it might represent outside of a work environment, it suggests to me, to a degree, an element of this gift being kind of leaden and being stuck with this gift. And so there's kind of a sinking quality to it. And while it's beneficial, it's also leaving you stuck, in a sense. So the next thing that I do is I look at the columns and the rows. So I'm going to start with the rows. So I'm going to look at this combination here. So we've got garden, mountain, we've got bouquet, moon, and stars. I was looking at the houses for a sec. So here's an interesting combination, again, for someone who's not super happy. The moon is an interesting card for me too, because its primary definition for me is is reputation. That's the word I was searching for there. But oftentimes I find that it can indicate just darkness, nighttime. And so I think that while they are gifted, they are in a situation where they're sort of lost, in a sense, in terms of their direction. I would also say that they need to think about their reputation and their sense of who they want to be seen as they set their course. So I think there's 2 interesting things happening there. This bouquet card is so fascinating, right? Because this is someone who's really unhappy. We're going to have some noise. It's a noisy day. I may have to close the window. Anyway. it seems to have passed. So we've got the bouquet and the owl here, the birds. And I traditionally look at the birds in terms of anxiety or conversation, certainly. Whoops. But, again, there's this gift is sort of a white elephant in a sense, because it's a situation that has benefit, of course, but it's also causing a fair amount of anxiety. And so it's an anxiety-inducing situation. Let me clear out some of these so that we can see a bit better. All right, so now what we're going to look at is the moon and the anchor. They may be in a position at work. One of the reasons why they may be unhappy is because they have a reputation for being kind of a stick in the mud about what they do. So, and then we look at the stars and the heart here, and that's another interesting combination because their direction, the way they need to go, should be in a place where they feel good. So even if they're not, even if the job is a gift, I think by and large, the fact that they're not feeling good about it, isn't great. Obviously, it confirms that, but they could be working towards a direction that feels better. And then we'll look at this row here. So we've got the birds, the anchor, and the heart. And here's an interesting thing where I associate the heart generally with good feelings, you know what I mean? I think it's a card that traditionally represents something nice, but I do think that they're stuck feeling anxious. This combination of anxiety, anchor, and heart, I think that their anxiety is weighing heavy on their heart, to just sort of take it really literally, and that's not a great situation to be in. Now, if I were to look at the heart and knight it knights to the garden, to the bouquet. So again, I feel like, there's good stuff certainly in this job. But it doesn't seem like it's enough. And I also sort of feel like the absence of cards below it is telling, because it doesn't really offer much in terms of what's going on underneath. So it's an interesting series of cards here describing their situation at work, but what matters most, I think, is how they're feeling. Boy, is it noisy today. How they're feeling. And I think the lack of direction that they've got, I think that that's really interesting too. So, whoops. So what I'm going to do now is just explore a little bit of the houses that these cards sit in that are surrounding the anchor. We already looked at the fact that the anchor sits in the house of the lilies. I think that it's certainly a job. It's a long-term job. You know what I mean? I think the combination of lilies as maturity and the anchor as work suggests, again, a long-term quality there. The bouquet sits in the house of the garden, and what this suggests to me, I think, is that the real gift at work is the people that they work with, that this person works with. That really makes more sense to me now that I look at it that way. The moon is in the house of the mountain, and that's an interesting thing too, because I think that they are sort of blocked from being perceived the way they want to be. I think that they are aware that their perception may be not the way they want it to be, but that they're really blocked from doing much about it. It's kind of out of their control, this person's control, how they're seen. The star, interestingly, is in the house of the paths. And so I think this is a time where this person really needs to consider making a choice about where they're going. The heart sits in the house of the sun here. Whoops. Let's go back to what we were doing. Technology has a mind of its own. So the house sits in the house of the heart sits in the house of the sun. So I think that suggests, in essence, that they need to really shine a light on what feels good right now, and they may also want to just get outside and sort of get away from, get into the sunlight to feel better. So they may want to get away from work. The fact that the anxiety card, the owl, sits in the house of the woman doesn't mean a whole lot to me. That house, in this case, because it's not a relationship reading and there's not any sort of prominent woman at work in this situation, in that case I sort of would read it in terms of a receptive situation, or to be completely gender, fucked, I guess. The passivity, and so I think that their anxiety may be causing them to be a little less, quote, active than they might normally be. All right, so the situation at work, I think there's a lot there. I think just to summarize really quickly, um, their community, like the key points here, that their community is really a gift. And I would say, just sort of looking at it this way, their community sees them as moving in the right direction. If we take the moon as seeing people, or as perception, but their anxiety, they're really weighed to their anxiety. They're really sort of stuck to the situation where they just don't feel good. And that they may need to start thinking about the direction. Needs to be a choice where they just get out to a better feeling, where they like sort of just are out in a better environment. So the next thing I'm going to look at is the House of the Man, or I'm sorry, the card for the man, and just sort of look at, like, so that's the job, but sort of where's he? So again, I'm going to take the 9 cards around him, and this is a reading for a man, so I'm going to scoop around here. Whoops. This is such an interesting thing, because once it commits to being a line, it's like committed to it. Alright, so the man is in the House of the Mice right out of the gate, so he's really feeling diminished, which makes a lot of sense. And he connects up here to the Cat o' Nine Tails, or the whip in most decks. And I think this creates a sense of, a man who's sort of repeatedly being hit, you know what I mean? Like, he's repeatedly stuck in this unhealthy, unhappy situation. So that seems to make sense as well. That confirms the way he's feeling, certainly. So what's interesting is that we have some overlap between the cards of the anchor here of the job and him, and they happen to be the stars and the heart. So we're actually going to look at these in terms of the context of him as well. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to look at the first row. So we've got the whip, the clover, and the fish. So here's a really interesting combo, right? Because we start with something really negative, this unhappiness, but there's luck, there's sort of abundance involved and luck involved. So now this makes me think that this negative situation actually might be a good thing, certainly from a financial standpoint, and I think that makes sense. Like, he's doing well monetarily at the moment. But this also, this repeated sort of unhappiness may actually be the lucky thing he needs to get out, you know what I mean, and to get into a different direction, and to go find the sort of source of income that he wants. So now we look at, I'm going to get rid of this for a sec. Now we're going to look at this column, or this row rather, and we've got, again, the stars, the man, and the tower. And here's something really interesting. I'm going to use directionality here because he's looking towards his direction and away from the institution. And that may be something really important if we look at it from a directionality standpoint, in the sense of, like, his focus really needs to be on where he's going, where he's headed, and less on the institution. But what's curious, right, is we have the institution in the House of the Heart. So clearly there's something about this institution, something about this company that he actually likes, So even though he feels like he has to turn his back from it and go in a different direction, he doesn't necessarily want to leave it behind, because he has good feelings toward it. So that's an interesting combination, isn't it? And then finally, I'm going to look at this row here. So again, we have the heart, and we have the woman and the letter. Again, because this isn't a relationship reading, and there's not in any sense like a particular relationship at play, I think it's possible for some folks, not all, to read the woman as sort of a receptive energy, and the male as an active energy, so to speak. So this does have a foundational row, and it's interesting because I think what makes him feel good is when he's able to sort of engage and sort of receive if we look at the letter as writing, this person is a writer as well. So I feel like that suggests really a nice quality that their foundation, so to speak, rests on the fact that they feel good when they're able to be creative and engage with their work. To receive the opportunity to make things, to write and sit and write. So let me just get rid of these, and we'll go and look at the columns now. So the first column, again, we have the whip, the stars, and the heart. And if I just think in terms of the whip as repetitive, I think that there's a repetitive nature toward thinking about where you're going and how it's going to make you feel. Again, pretty straight up situation. That's how I feel about that repetitive, nature. There may also be a part of him that kind of enjoys feeling beat up and put upon. This is an interesting row because we have the clover, the man, and the woman. Now, if this were a relationship reading, we would say that, there's probably a little bit of a chance of... Hold on, I'm going to edit this out. Alright. There's maybe a little bit of chance of a relationship working out, but that's not what the woman represents in this case, because, of course, she's not a person. Now, what this may suggest is that there's a woman in his life who may be able to kind of give him a little bit of direction. But, it's an interesting thing with Lenormand, and one of the reasons I often find it frustrating is are the man and women cards when it's not a relationship reading and the people aren't hugely affected, there may be many people that are affecting their day-to-day existence, but not one in particular. I don't think for this person there's any one, quote, woman who's bringing him luck, and it may just be another iteration of how community... earlier I talked about the community in the garden here with the bouquet is really what creates whatever luck there is. This row here with the fish, the tower, and the letter, I think could suggest that there's some money to be found in an institution that takes advantage of his writing. But it also may suggest going, and realizing that there are abundant other opportunities out there if he goes and communicates with them. If this were a Kipper reading, this row would be technically inauspicious behind the man. This would be auspicious because it's in front of him. And it may suggest that he's not looking at how many opportunities there are to reach out to, because he's so focused on this idea of like finding the right thing, that you're so focused on the idea of finding the right thing that you're actually missing the opportunity to go and see how many right things there might be. So by and large, this isn't really a bad reading so far. If we look at the houses, we already did for these two here, but the man sits in the house of the mice I talked about. The woman sits in the house of the moon. So again, if I hate doing this, but it's really the only way I know how to do it. The moon as reputation may suggest, again, that he sees himself as somewhat passive in this situation. The key, the letter is in the house of the key, which may suggest that communicating or writing may be a key to getting out of the situation he's in. The fish is in the house of the bear, which means there's a lot of powerful opportunities, a lot of sort of strength around the abundance. There's an abundance of strength, and maybe there's a strong income at work here. Luck is in the house of the fox, which is interesting. The clover is in the house of the fox, which may suggest to a degree that the whatever luck is there is fleeting, or it's not, it's dubious. And then interestingly, the child is in the house of the whip, or the whip rather is in the house of the child. So I would read the conflict here as sort of in part a result of the immaturity of a situation. Now that could mean the immaturity just of the business and like the newness of the business that this person's working with, but again, that's just a guess. All right. So now what I want to do is, again, let's just sort of look at anything else that might be interesting, right? In terms of cards that pertain to work, that pertain to jobs, etc. As a writer, I think it's interesting to kind of look at what's around the letter card here. So it's, again, in the House of the Key. That's interesting. It's connected to woman and dog. So there's certainly like a deep, commitment to this work. Also, it's connected up here to the writer. So, getting out there and getting work into the world might be worth doing. And the writer's in the House of the Ring, which may suggest making a commitment to getting his shit out there in the world. And the dog is in the House of the Fish, which I think suggests just sort of creating a loyalty to making sure that you're caring for your financial well-being. Now, the other thing to do, we looked at the anchor and what what house it was in. In the anchor house, we've got the tree. And I think what this does is it underscores how much this person's well-being is affected by their job, health or well-being. I just tend to think of this generally as well-being because that feels like a safer bet. So it feels a lot like the state of his job, the state of his situation is really having an impact on his well-being, and it's hard to, it's hard to deny that. So that's an interesting thing. I'm going to look for the house of the letter and see what's in there, because that has a connection to writing as well. So I'm curious to see sort of where that lives, and the dead tree is in it. So this is an interesting thing because it suggests ending. And writing seems to be such a key here, but the way that these connect is sort of interesting. And let's look at what's in the House of the Coffin. It's the mice. So I'm just kind of doing a little linking here. And then what's in the House of the Mice is the man. So we have this really interesting interplay here of like how writing is so important to him, but it's like dead. And I think again there's like a connection to the tree. His well-being is affecting this to the point where he's not really doing it, and it's sort of diminishing his ability, and he's really feeling diminished and sort of dead in some ways. So really not a healthy place for him to be in terms of work, right? In terms of his real passion. Another thing I might do, since writing is important, is actually look at the book, which is sitting in the House of the Scythe. So again, if I think about the book as sort of a piece of writing, it's being cut. And so there's something interesting. What's in the House of the Scythe? This is one of those times where I wish I knew the houses by heart. I'm sorry, I'm looking not for the House of the Scythe, I'm looking for the Scythe, which in this deck is the... Oh, it's right here. So it's in the House of the Book. So again, like his creative life is really being impacted by this. So not good, you know what I mean? So again, I think that this is going to be central, doing something that sort of makes it possible for him to do what he's doing is central. So those are some really key, interesting things. Let me just get rid of these lines. All right. So just to go back, so the tree was interesting for his well-being. So what I'm going to do is look at what's sitting in the House of the Tree right now. And we have got the gold ring. So I think this suggests making a commitment to your well-being. I think that's really important. Anything else? The bear card can be associated with bosses. It's in the House of the Ship, which may suggest that the boss is focused on other things or going on another journey right now. What's in the House of the Clover, which is about luck, is the stork. So there's a sense of like moving, migration might be a lucky thing. Whoops. Anything else that's really interesting? The key is an interesting card in terms of solving things, and it's in the House of the Tower. So maybe there's other opportunities in his institution that might actually, unlock things for him and sort of get him out, like unlocked from the tower. Um, so in the house of the man is the house is the clouds, and so there's definitely a sense of confusion about what to do, which makes sense. You can go on and on, you know what I mean? I don't believe that necessarily every card in a tableau needs to be read. There are some interesting things to play with, you know what I mean? The stork, in the house of the stork, we have the sun, and so there's a sense there of migration probably being a good thing. In the house of the stars, where we think about direction, there's a burden, there's the cross. There's also a sense of faith to a degree with the cross. So, the sense of direction right now is the pressure to find direction is such a burden that, but you could also look at this as having faith in finding a direction. The mountain is in the house of the birds, which again sort of iterates, again what I talked about here of the owl card as being about anxiety. I think the mountain there, this anxiety is definitely a blockage in terms of getting things done. The paths, the choices in the house of the whip, which might suggest like being aggressive about making choices that are going to get you where you need to be. Those are the ones that really matter, I think, for me. So just to sum up, I mean, I think the cards around the anchor suggest that community itself is good at work, but just the fact that he's feeling the way he's feeling isn't good. And so even if the environment might not be as bad as he thinks it is, his feelings matter, and it's clearly affecting his well-being and his ability to do the things that are actually really key in his development and that get him closer to where he wants to be. So it seems a lot like he needs to make some choices about what direction he's going to go in order to kind of sort of get his plans back on track. So he's not feeling quite, so his life isn't feeling quite so dead, in terms of like getting the shit that he wants to get done. One of the questions that was originally asked was, is there any chance of this getting better, of the work situation getting better? And you could say yes, there might be some potential if we come down here again and look at the cards around the anchor. There's no directionality with the anchor, so I just sort of default to the right side being the future. So, having, there may be some decisions that are going to give him a sense of direction that sort of brightens up his feelings, you know what I mean? So things could get a little bit better. And he's certainly focused on this idea of direction. But it doesn't seem like it's going to happen without choices. The paths card, and the choices look like they're not going to be easy to make. They're going to, they're going to have to be somewhat difficult choices, but he really needs to think about how this job is affecting his general well-being and the impact that it's having on the stuff he wants to do. So maybe there's some small potential for things getting better, but it seems like in order for things to get better, he needs to make a decision about what's going to get him closer to the things that matter. So that's kind of a meandering view of my look at the grand tableau for this person. Again, this is a real reading, but I won't say who it's for. And again, just sort of an example of how I've been studying and working with the cards. I actually, this is a sort of weirdly confident exploration, which is normally I feel sort of strangely hamstrung by Lenormand. Although I will say that the more cards in a reading, the more I sort of feel like I get closer to meaning. So to give this guy an answer, your situation at work is as you described it. It may not be quite as bad objectively as it feels like it is, and certainly the community around you is a real gift there. But your daily life, your well-being is really being impacted by this. It's really getting in the way of the stuff you want to do. It's diminishing you. It's diminishing your sense of self. And the thing is to make some hard choices about where you're going to go. But there is some luck in movement. It's just going to take a while. And again, if I look at the rider here with the burning serpent, with the serpent or the snake, as the snake not necessarily something bad, but as something winding, it's a journey that's going to take some time. So, all right, that's that. Be good.